good morning from my side. Mario Reimbold. I'm working for TÜV Rheinland Energy since 15 years now. I'm the manager of the heating department, which deals with several heating technologies. But at the moment, most of the time, it's heat pump technology. I would like to give you an overview about the testing procedures and the factory production control within the HP KEYMARK scheme group. I'm also representing the test lab peer group within the HP KEYMARK scheme, and I'm also working as an inspector for the factory inspection control. So I have actually two hats at this moment, and I can tell you a bit from both sides. Just to give you a short overview about the agenda, I would like to focus on the testing procedure regarding the first admission and the surveillance test. Later on, I would like to give a focus on the sound measurements, which is always a very special topic. And then we will talk about the factory production control, which can be combined with the physical inspection and picking. So let's start with the overview. Tarek already mentioned several standards, several types of devices, but I would like to repeat that. And we're talking about electrical driven heat pumps in general. Most of the certified heat pumps are space heating or space cooling heat pumps. Most of them have usually both functions. Of course, second most one is the domestic hot water heat pump technology. So a heat pump which is solely working for domestic hot water. And we, of course, have the combination heater. So a heat pump technology which can deliver both central heating and domestic hot water. Relatively new is the hybrid system technology, which might be attractive for some European countries or for some houses which are currently heating the house with gas, and they would like to not switch completely to a heat pump technology, so they can add a heat pump and work it as a hybrid system, depending on the bivalent point, which decides which technology starts working. The heat pump technology is usually air to water, some of them brine to water, which is then the the geothermal energy. We have also air to air machines, which are limited to 12 kilowatts, but we also have air to air machines, which are able to deliver domestic hot water. And of course, direct exchange to water machines. And all these heat pump technologies, they have to follow different tests. First of all, this starts when you want to enter the certification scheme is the first admission test. This is where you have to make sure, but you have to prove that your machine is following the eco design rules. And later on, usually after 1 year, it's starting with the surveillance tests. And I will explain that later on. Of course, we have the periodic testing approach depending on your approach. So you can decide whether if you do the 1 out of 5 approach or the 1 off the approach. And all these different tests, all these first admission tests, surveillance tests, and the periodic testing approaches, they all contain efficiency testing, operating, and sound tests, which are following the standard rules, which I will explain next slide. Yes, and as I mentioned before, I'm working also as an inspector, so I would like to talk about audits, the factory inspection and the physical inspection, which is different, and I will explain that later. All these requirements are defined in lots of documents, which you can find on the heatpump.eu website. But I think the most important 3 ones is the main document, which defines the scheme rules, and then the Annex A, which defines the testing rules, and the Annex B, which defines the requirements for the factory inspections and factory production controls. And they were just renewed in March, and you can find them on the website online. Okay, just to give you a short overview about the most common tested and certified products, most of them follow the EN 14511 and EN 14825 to define the test requirements for setting up the heat pumps, installing them, defining the measurement accuracy. and also defining the test points, which have to be measured depending on the temperature level. It's either low temperature, medium, or high temperature, and also the climate zone. And of course, for the domestic hot water, we're following the EN 16471, and for the sound power measurement, we follow the two standards, 12102-1 for the central heating and -2 for the domestic hot water ones. And of course, I mentioned the groundwater heat pumps. We're following this standard here, and all of them in the current version. So let's have a look on the testing procedure. I created this table a while ago, and I still had to adjust it a bit, but I would like to focus now on the column B and C, so which is admission and surveillance, because I would like to point out the difference between that. When we're talking about the space heating or the space cooling test, the effort at the first admission is higher than the effort during the surveillance test. That means if you have, for example, the heat pump, which has a certification for low and medium temperature heat pump, or which want to have a certification, then you have to test both of them. Then you have to test, for example, for an air-to-water heat pump, A7W35 and A7W55. And if you do the surveillance later on 1 year, you just have to do either one of them, which is defined usually by the certification body. So the effort will be lower. Same for space cooling tests. Then it is only one application of the two space cooling test points. Different is it with the sound power level test. You have to repeat the sound power level test, depending if it's it doesn't matter if it's a central heating or domestic hot water device. The operating tests, and this is, we had a big discussion with that within my team. So what are actually operating tests? Because according to 15411, there are actually more operating tests defined. But if we talk within the HP KEYMARK scheme group about the operating test, we talk about the starting tests. We're talking about shutting off the transfer medium flow and the complete power supply. We're not talking about the boundaries, for example, which takes a long time for the test institute. And yeah, if we do the surveillance, we have either shutting off the transfer medium flow or complete power supply failure. So you can see that the difference between admission and surveillance is just the amount of necessary testing. Yeah, if we talk about domestic hot water devices, it is pretty similar. The sound tests have to be done both completely during admission and surveillance. If we have, if we do the tapping test, so the actual performing test, it is similar, and during the operating test, you can compare it to the central heating devices, then you have to do one less. But actually during the domestic hot water test, you have to do pretty much the same during admission, at first admission and surveillance test. Yeah, and combination heat pumps, they actually follow both, just the both previous slides, depending which technology you're talking about. Central heating and domestic hot water are both tested differently. The central heating, still admission, you have more effort, and during surveillance you have less effort. And for the domestic hot water and the sound test, you have to do all the tests. So this is the different tests which needs to be done for the admission and the surveillance. And what do we do during the test? I told you that we're following the 14511 and 14825 test basically. So this is a typical test point for the evaluation of the volume flow during A7W25. And this is, it's actually A2W35. And so this is, we're just following the standard rules and testing each point according to 14511 and according to 14825, which is necessary to calculate the seasonal efficiency to follow the ERP rules. And during the sound measurements test, we have the same situation. You have the heat up phase. You have the standby power inputs where you measure the losses actually. Then you have the tapping profile where you measure the actually tapping efficiency, and the V40 tests. And as I said, all of them have to be performed during first admission and during the surveillance test. The calculation methods, no differences. We still follow the rules, and this is what needs to be presented to the certification body later on, combined in the report, so that everybody can see what was tested, what was the result, and what is the declared value. The time frame is approximately 1 week for the testing of a central heating device. It depends on the kind of device, if it's a split unit or it's a monoblock unit. It's also depending on the size of the machine. Combination heat pump takes usually 2 weeks because you have to test both. You have to test the central heating function and the domestic hot water function. And for the domestic hot water, it's usually 1 week. This is depending on the hysteresis on the set point. So if you have a large hysteresis, for example, 10 or 15 degrees, the tests usually take longer. The standby phase takes then way more than 48 hours. Usually it's something between 70 and 80. We have seen that, and this is extending the test time. Common problems are, of course, everywhere are problems during testing, we have to set up the compressor frequencies during the test, especially for the 14825 tests, which means we need the possibility to access the system or the inverter. This is done usually by an external computer or laptop provided by the manufacturer, or it is done within the control unit with a special password to enter the setup area. And sometimes we experience problems with the measurement technology inside the heat pumps. So we have a defect sensor, or the problem is that we're measuring for a long time. For example, the domestic hot water tests are fully automated usually. So that means you start the test, for example, on Monday, and then you finish it on Friday or the Saturday. And then you see that there was a mistake with the temperature setup, or there was the temperature sensor was not working well. And this is a pity then, because then you wasted lots of time and you have to repeat the tests. Usually we install the heat pumps according to manufacturer's instructions. But if you have a split system, it is important to use the right refrigerant pipes. Right diameter is really important, and we also need information about the refrigerant amount and the type, if it must be filled by the test institute, as well as the exact parameters for testing. As I said, compressor frequency and so on. It is very important, and the computer or equal system to control the frequencies, and especially for the sound measurements, and I will focus on that now. The fitting duct system, it's important. It must be the correct shape and the correct material. So let's talk about the sound measurements. We have usually, this is an example for a domestic hot water pump, we have usually a ducted system installed on the top of the machine, and this duct must be a reverberant piping. And if it's not a reverberant piping, or it is an absorbing piping, this can have an influence on the measurement results. And so it is defined in 12102-2 that the material must be reverberant, so that the sound emission, which is coming from the actual machine can't be absorbed during the measurement. And we measure the actual sound measurements. So this is sometimes very difficult to install, because the standard defines that you need lots of space above the heat pump, and some of these heat pumps are even 2.30 meters tall. So you need quite a high acoustic chamber to be able to install it according to the standard. And that's sometimes a problem, but usually a solution is found everywhere. And the other thing is split units. Then you have to do 2 tests for the outdoor unit and for the indoor unit, of course. Usually the indoor units are very, very silent, especially if we're talking about hydraulic split. So if we have, for example, an R290 unit, which is constructed as a monoblock device, and it's just working with an hydraulic unit which is sitting inside, and there is almost no noise coming from the hydraulic unit, and it is almost impossible to measure it because it is below 20, 22 or 23 dBA. If we talk about the test conditions, it is actually the same as defined in the eco design rules. We're testing at the 55 flow temperature, but under the seat point conditions. So that means that we have the partial load conditions with the corresponding compressor frequency. Yeah. The sound measurements are a bit more difficult during because we have to measure actually 3 points, which is 25, 40, and 50 degrees. I'm sorry for the format, but I think there is point 1 is missing. It's 25 degrees. So we have to heat up the machine with cold water up to 25 degrees. Then we have to do a short tapping to make sure that we have actually 25 degrees in the tank. Then we do the sound measurement. Then we start heating up again up to 40 degrees. Repeat again, do a small tapping, do the sound measurement, and then we do it with 50 degrees. So that usually takes a whole day to do that testing with installing, with heating up, and some of you might know that some domestic hot water heat pumps, they really have low heating capacities, just a few hundred watts. So it really takes a long time to do this testing. As you can see here, it was something like 7 hours. And yeah, this takes a whole day. Yes, so that was testing procedures for first admission, surveillance tests, and sound measurements. And now I would like to focus on the factory production control. During the factory production control, which usually happens after the certification, we focus on the production circuits, on the production line in the production plant. And this, why we're doing it, we're doing it to ensure that the product is being produced according to the HPK KEYMARK rules, of course, and make sure that the product is produced as we have tested it. And if the production plant contains a ISO 9000 certification, we can do an abbreviated examination, but we're still focusing on some points of the document parts. So it's a bit small. I hope you can read it, but what you can see here are 3 pages from the factory production control report, which you can find also online on keymark.eu, and you will find several requirements. The first slides, the first pages are mostly information with where is it, the address. Then it contains a list of the certified product, which is really important. Then the persons who are in charge for the quality and who are in charge for the audit. But after chapter 3 and 4, we're talking about requirements for the actual production, and so that is mostly our focus during the inspections, that we check the measurement instruments which are used during the production or in the production line. Most of them are electrical tests, for example, the leakage test with an inert gas, the refrigerant filling station to make sure that it is the right amount of refrigerant, and of course the labeling and the information so that the product can be identified through the complete production process and also afterwards in the storage. And yeah, of course, also when it is installed at the end consumer and there is a problem, that you can identify the production date and see what has happened at that day. And yeah, as I said, if there is an existing ISO 9000 certification, we can do an abbreviated examination, but we're still focusing on the declaration of conformity and the responsibilities. This is one of the most important documents a manufacturer has to issue, and you're defining usually the regulations and the directives which the product is following. And it is important that it contains the right content, the right standards, or the right regulations and directives, but also it is important who is responsible to sign it and who's creating it. And this is sometimes difficult to find out. So if you're talking to an employee of the company and I'm asking you, okay, what's the content of the declaration of conformity and who is signing it, then nobody knows, and then it takes a long time to find out who is responsible. That we discover that sometimes, so this is why we focus on that. Of course, also working instructions which are defined for the production line especially. So for example, there is defined how to perform a leakage test. How do you do it, with which gas, which pressure, and so on. And also the qualification of the stuff, especially during the brazing process or soldering, if applicable, depending on the device. Is there a qualification? Is there training? What do they do if there is a leakage? Do they do an extra training and so on? The complete audit duration takes approximately 5 to 6 hours. It's a bit depending on how fast it goes. Some plants are a bit larger, so you have to walk a lot through the halls, and that takes a lot of time. But usually it's done within 6 hours. And yeah, the other thing is the physical inspection. And the physical inspection, we do not focus so much on the production and on the quality management of the plant. We're focusing more on the product. So what we're doing there is we're trying to identify each part of the product and make sure that it is the same as it was during the initial type test. So we check for the compressor, we check for the expansion valve, heat exchanger, condenser, evaporator, whatever you find in the machine, we check for it. We check dimensions. So if you have, for example, the same opening and for the ventilation, etc. We also check for the software version. I know that, or we know that there is not a big influence by the software version, because maybe most of the time the software version is just updated for comfort issues, or maybe to delete some errors which were in there. It is not affecting the efficiency. At least it should not. But we're still checking it. We're checking it during the initial inspection, and then we're checking it during the physical inspection. So if there is an update, you can see the development between that, but there shouldn't be any influence on the performance. If applicable, we can also do a picking. That depends on how many plants you have, how many production plants you have, and how many devices you have certified, and which approach you're following. I've mentioned the 1 out of 5 approach, and I have mentioned the one-off approach. If you're doing the one-off approach, you don't have to do a picking. But if you do the 1 out of 5 approach, you have to do the picking every following year. And the picking is done according to the certification body. So they tell us, the inspectors, which device shall be picked. And then I'm usually going to the storage or directly to the production line. And I'm picking one of the devices, checking the serial number, marking it, and then it is sent to the next test laboratory of your choice, and it is testing according to the rules and according to the standards I have just explained earlier in this presentation. So that is basically it. That is the testing procedures for most of the common heat pump devices which are certified in the HP KEYMARK frame, and this is inspection and physical inspection for the power plants and for the production plants, sorry. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free.